Welcome to this presentation on comma rules, part 3. We're going to be focusing on how we need to use commas with specific ways we use adjectives, and then afterthoughts as well. So our first rule, comma rule number 5, is where we put commas between multiple adjectives, which are descriptive words that modify or describe the same noun. And what happens is people like to stack adjectives to describe something. And when this happens, you separate the adjectives with a comma. It could be 2 adjectives, it could be more, but you separate them with a comma. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that both of the adjectives describe the same thing, the same noun. So in this sentence, the silky, shimmery dress I loved was too big. So we found our 2 descriptive words that are stacked, silky, shimmery. And when we figure out what they're describing, draw little arrows to it, we see that they're both describing the same thing. And so we would put a comma between them. Here's an example of descriptive words that do not describe the same thing. So he held a fiery red balloon. We have fiery and we have red. But the problem is that they don't both point to balloon. Red describes balloon, but fiery describes red. So we wouldn't be putting a comma between these. And the way you know whether or not you need a comma beyond, like first, you decide if they're describing the same thing. If they're describing the same thing, then you run this comma test. And you know you need a comma if you can switch the order of the adjectives and if you could put the word and between them. So we're going to look at an example that does need a comma because it's going to pass this test. So the example sentence is, the wine offered a fragrant, captivating bouquet. So fragrant and captivating are our 2 adjectives or descriptive words. So our test part 1 is, can I switch the order of the adjectives? So I flipped the order. The wine offered a captivating, fragrant bouquet. It still makes sense. It sounds okay. The meaning hasn't changed. It passes the test. So part 2 is, can I add the word and between the adjectives and have it still make sense? The wine offered a fragrant and captivating bouquet. Yep. It still makes sense. The meaning is unchanged. It passed the test. So we would put a comma between fragrant and captivating, like where it's circled above. So here we're going to look at an example sentence that it has 2 adjectives, but it's not going to pass the test. So the fuzzy baby cat is so cute. Test part 1, can I switch the order of the adjectives? The baby fuzzy cat is so cute. Well, I've never heard of a breed of cat called fuzzy cats. I wish I had. The baby fuzzy cat, it just doesn't sound right. You can hear that it doesn't sound right. It doesn't pass the test. And, oops, I'll go back one. When we try to put the word and between it, it's not going to sound right either. The fuzzy and baby cat is so cute. Just doesn't sound right. So you're having to trust your ear about whether or not it sounds right. So because it failed both parts of the test, we don't put a comma there. It's okay as is, we leave it alone. So that is rule number 5, commas between adjectives. Rule 6 is commas before afterthoughts. So you use a comma before an afterthought. An afterthought renames something earlier in the sentence or adds additional information to the sentence at the end of the sentence. But if you remove it, the sentence will still make sense. This means the information is applicable but not necessary to the meaning of the sentence. So an afterthought is like, hey, this is bonus information, but if I left it off, it would still be okay. So here's the example. The War of 1812 was vitally important, far more important to Canada than it was for Britain. So the afterthought comes after the full sentence and it gives more information about something that came in the full sentence. And really, it's giving us more information about how it was vitally important. And so, if you can see that you have a full sentence and then you have an afterthought that kind of explains something from earlier, and the afterthought is a fragment and it doesn't add essential information, it could be removed and the sentence would still make sense. You know, you found the afterthought and you put a comma between the full sentence and the afterthought. So here is how we would test it to see if it made sense without the afterthought. The War of 1812 was vitally important. We still have the essential meaning of the sentence. It's just missing the bonus information. So it passes our test. We can put a comma there. And when you're writing, it's really up to you to determine, is this essential information or is it non-essential? Like, is it just a fancy add-on, a fancy afterthought? And so you have to decide whether or not it's appropriate to use a comma there, because the comma indicates to the reader how important the information is that follows. One other thing that I want to point out is the difference between the words that and which. We use those all the time and we use them interchangeably, but they're not actually interchangeable. They do something different in a sentence. The word that means that whatever comes after it, you have to have it in the sentence for it to really make sense. And you don't use a comma because you don't want to say, hey, this is just a fancy afterthought. You don't use a comma because it's important information. The word which, however, indicates the material is non-essential, so you would use a comma. So this is kind of like shorthand. That, it's important. Which, it's non-essential. So here's an example. Toby hid his hands behind his back, which I found suspicious. So the comma and the which are both telling me that what comes after is an afterthought. It's non-essential. It's a non-essential fragment. And the which hints that it's not essential, so I would put the comma there. And if I covered it up, the meaning stays essentially the same. So here's an example with that. June needed to find the direction booklet that went with the printer. And it has a full sentence and additional information at the end, but because the word that is there, it's signaling that what comes after it has to be in the sentence. So we leave off the comma. So this is kind of a trick for you. If you see that and which, remember which, you do have to put a comma. That, you leave it alone. All right, now go try the exercises.